And that's not all we're talking about tonight, so it's time to bring in our all-star panel. Troy Mayor Ethan Baker and former state rep Sherry Nago, obviously two contributors to the Pulse that we love having on. One Republican, one Democrat, who both have an uncanny way of doing something that no one seems to know how to do on social media, which is to agree without being disagreeable, or disagree without being disagreeable. And so it's great to see you both. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
It's good to be here.
Okay, where do we begin? My goodness, there is so much going on right now. First of all, obviously we have the RFK hearings that happened. Just your initial thoughts, hearing what you saw kind of unfold in the last few days in Washington. Ethan?
Yeah, it's a lot. There's always a lot to unpack when it comes to what happens in Washington.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly the hearings with RFK, no surprises for me, obviously. The expectation was it was going to be contentious, and it certainly was. And RFK certainly has put forth a lot of opinions that, you know, some people like, some people absolutely hate. I think, you know, doctors are going to disagree on a lot of what he says, and some doctors do agree. So that's very fascinating. But really, to me, it's always fascinating. The hearings that happen in Washington, the amount of animosity that happens by members of the opposite party, that to me is just always appalling.
And some who are from the same party. Sherry, when you see some of this stuff unfold with Republicans and Democrats holding people to account, and you see kind of the political theater that happens in that room, as an American and as a politician, do you look at that and say, I see what they're doing there, or do you really think it's good conversation?
No, it's not, and I have to agree with Ethan on this point. While I certainly, completely contrast RFK's positions on most and all things, I think Ethan is right. It's really disappointing to see any of our political leadership go back and forth with the antics that we're seeing. Right now, the American people are losing, and they're losing really big because most of the infighting that continues to go on and having to adjudicate every decision that is coming out of this administration is a total waste of time. And looking at some of the research, it basically is saying that it's putting us back almost 10 to 15 years from our democratic or democracy base as Americans. And that's embarrassing internationally. And I think we have to move forward.
Well, moving forward means trying to figure out what we've done in the last few weeks here. Let's talk about what's going on with the D.C. lawsuit right now. We understand a city that both of you have visited, spent time in, and understand pretty well the crime problem. Let's not even try to start to debate whether or not there was a crime issue. People who are Democrats and Republicans say the streets weren't always safe. The bottom line, though, is how do you solve it? Now we're hearing people say, hey, we're filing suit against the Trump administration in D.C. for this. Do you believe there's any water, any merit to this lawsuit? Mayor Ethan.
Sure, I think so. I mean, I think that there's always the claim that, you know, you don't have the right to come into our city and do the things that you're trying to do as it relates to the National Guard. And I mean, we'll see. Obviously, different courts are going to rule different ways, and with our appellate process, it could work its way, and it might be a while before we actually have a decision that makes a lot of sense. But in D.C., though, the president, right, has jurisdiction over the National Guard, so it's different than Chicago or Baltimore, New Orleans. He does, but whether he can usurp certain powers is always going to be a question. And, you know, we're not talking about the safety issue in the crime, but everyone is viewing this from a different lens, and I think that's what's getting lost as well. We're talking a lot about the very specifics of National Guard, troops being on the streets, but the people who live in this city who are experiencing it every day, they have a very different view of it. Some do support the idea of feeling safer, others are mortified by it. So it really goes to different lenses, I think. The crux of the lawsuit basically is saying, hey, look, we're suing because you did all of this without the consent of local leadership in D.C. Sherry, I was surprised only because I thought if there's one place where this president can do this, it is Washington. And you wouldn't think that you'd have this kind of legal pushback, but you are.
There's legal pushback. Certainly the Mayor Bowser, city council members, but also the overstep with congressional leadership. I think that's one of the areas where the presidents continue to step over our congressional leadership to a point of trying to set precedents. What he's actually doing essentially in many instances is just testing like a toddler. How far can I go? How big of a tantrum can I have? What can I do until my parents actually get to the place where they discipline me? In our instance, what can he do until the people, finally, his numbers are tanking, people on all sides, more so independents, are expressing, you know, dissatisfaction with his leadership. And I think That's where we're going right now. I think he's still around 40, 45%, but that's not looking good for someone who is trying to, once again, change our Constitution so he could probably run again.
Let's talk for a moment about what we're seeing in Detroit right now. You hear that in Chicago, it may be a matter of hours before we start seeing perhaps the first tank roll in. No one's happy about it in the state of Illinois at the state houses there, but this may happen. If it happens in Detroit, Mayor Mike Duggan, I asked the question to him yesterday on the Pulse, and he said, look, I'm not worried about it because I have a good relationship with the Trump administration. So much so, we're working with the U.S. attorney to make sure we have resources to take care of the crime issue before it becomes a crisis. Sherry, grade the mayor on how he's handled it.
Well, so here's what I'll say about Mayor Duggan. I think you cannot ignore he has exemplary administrative leadership and relationships on all sides of the aisle, which I believe is why he is running as an independent for governor. But we have to take a step back and look at what the governor's level of authority is in our state. As Governor Wes Moore pointed out, he's under no obligation to allow Trump to step all over his leadership and invoke and put in place the National Guards in Maryland. And I would say that Governor Whitmer would have to take a stand as well and push back on President Trump trying to bring the National Guard here.
But, Mayor Ethan, when you look at the relationship that Governor Whitmer has forged with this president, you look at the relationship that Mayor Duggan has forged with this president, it is amicable and at times even friendly. I mean, President Trump says nicer things about Governor Whitmer than Facebook in Michigan does. People literally he has said publicly, this is a good woman who's doing great work in Michigan. When you look at the relationships, why is that so important, even when you don't see eye to eye, to maintain that civility?
I think the most important thing is relationships when you're governing in any role, whether it's a legislator or whether you're in an executive role, is because those relationships will always come into play, like you just said. The fact that Mayor Duggan and Governor Whitmer have found a way to somewhat work with the Trump administration in a way that's not hurting them publicly or privately, it seems to be the right way to go. Some people choose a different path. I get it. There's disruptors. There's people who are going to yell and scream, and they're going to try to fight back against Trump that way. But to me, it seems like in Michigan, whether it's Detroit or whether it's the state as a whole, working and massaging those relationships is the key.
Well, and let's talk about that, Sherry, for a moment, because when you look at the last 2 years of our world in politics in this country, it's us versus them. There are Democrats who don't like Governor Whitmer anymore because she sat in the Oval Office. Is that a problem?
Well, so I was reading an article today that talked about the Democrats that are going to save us are not the Democrats that are in office now. And I think to that point, oftentimes they don't realize when it's important to sit down with whoever is in leadership to be able to negotiate across the aisle when there's opportunity. And I have to say this, as being a Detroiter, as being a former chair of the Detroit caucus even, I encourage the Detroit caucus at times that there may be instances in where you have to sit down with the leadership of the House right now and make decisions that benefit Detroit. So I am all about having those conversations, because if you don't have conversations, you can't get to a place of a common goal.
Well, and the common goal is to help the people on the other side of that camera, not to serve yourself and your ego. And I think that's obviously very important. Ethan, last word to you. You worked for President Reagan after he left office. President Reagan and Tip O'Neill, Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton. These are people who did not see eye to eye, but they figured out how to do the people's work. Will we ever see those days come back?
I believe so. I believe there's a lot of leaders out there today who are working really hard to make sure that happens. The problem is those leaders are getting pushed out by people who want a different system, and that's the scary thing for me. But the good people have to stay in and keep building those relationships and realizing that conversations are the key. Those relationships matter. We can do it. Just stay the course, Roop.
Well, if it starts at home, then we have two people here modeling that behavior right here at this desk. Sherry Gay, good to see you. Mayor Ethan Baker, great to see you as well. Thanks for joining us on The Pulse. All right, we're talking about health care after the break. Vaccines, a huge topic as lawmakers grilled Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. on the Capitol. Two doctors with two very different perspectives. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2.